Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war update news segment for the 1st of March 2023. Pinching a punch, first of the month, no returns. I have just got back from a neurologist appointment. I have primary progressive multiple sclerosis, as many of you will know, so that's why it's a little bit late today. Apologies. Let's get on with where we start the news with, which is the Ukrainian losses, Russian losses for the day before, as per the Ukrainians. All the usual caveats, inaccurate, possibly. Propaganda, possibly. Russia don't produce the same sort of things, but I find these useful and indicative. Okay, so yesterday, 650 liquidated personnel, ticking slightly back up again. 7 tanks, 8 armored personnel carriers, 10 artillery systems, 1 MLRS, 4 drones, and 5 vehicles and fuel tanks. There does appear to have been a Su-25 loss maybe yesterday. I don't know. There are different sort of claims hanging around for different things, so I'm not 100% sure. But in terms of these figures, as they are noted here, pretty average, I guess, for the kind of phase that we're in at the moment. 650 is over average by quite a few hundred, as calculated from the average over the whole war. But if you're talking about the last sort of month, we have been up to record numbers in terms of Russian personnel lost, as according to the Ukrainians, over 1,000 on some days. So it is below that kind of average, but above whole war average. 10 artillery systems is a useful degradation of the Russian artillery numbers. Let's go and have a look at some of these sorts of hits and losses that may have been involved. So, destruction of chaotic ammo dumps, says Special Kherson Cat, by the 103rd Separate Brigade of the Territorial Defence Forces. And this is the usual sort of thing that you see. I mean, there's nothing particularly interesting about this other than to say that this kind of stuff goes on every day, which is finding ammo dumps by drone and then dropping IEDs on those ammo dumps, and that will obviously affect the Russians' ability to strike the Ukrainians. And we already know they have shell hunger, a lack of ammunition for their artillery, and this will only hurt that. Now, that's not to say this isn't happening the other way, that Russia could well be doing this themselves, often to the Ukrainians, but that's just an example there. Here we have in Kadivka, a Russian warehouse was being hit and was caught cooking off. So this is HIMARS o'clock, really, one would think, with an ammunition storage facility. Again, that's the inference or the implication here. Quite what it is, I'm not sure, but if it's cooking off, you imagine that is ammunition. We have 4 drones being shot down last night. Now, Natalia Humanyuk from the Southern Command, here we go, says that this kind of activity, given the activities that Russia has already carried out in advance, drone recon, Shahed launches, and an attempt to check the air defense readiness, may indicate an upcoming missile attack in the next 2 days, said Natalia Humanyuk. I've been trying to work out why Russia would send across on consecutive nights sort of a bunch of drones, a few missiles, a bunch of drones. What are they trying to do? What's the point of that? Why not just try and do these saturation attacks that at least have a greater proportional success? And I think this is as good a theory as any, that it looks like they could be just trying to find out where the air defenses are. It's like these are sacrificial. Send them over, see where they get shot down. So a drone will go, for quite some while, and it will get shot down over this particular area in Ukraine. Right, there's some kind of SAM system there. Okay, these drones over in this area will fly this far before they get shot down. Okay, there's SAM system there. So then, when it comes to a rocket attack, saturation rocket attack, we will send them all in this kind of area where we think that there is a weakest air defense. That's the only reason for these kind of dribs and drabs approach to using these drones and missiles. Last night about 2:30, 3 explosions were heard in the area of Patoria in occupied Crimea, another town on the western coast of Crimea, Chornomorsk, was also heard several explosions at night, as per the Crimean Telegram channel. So there is quite a bit of activity going on with Ukrainian drones at the moment, both into Belgorod, and we'll talk about that in a second, further into, so one was apparently found in Moscow, having been shot out of the sky, and also down actually just to the east of Crimea in the Russian mainland there's been some drone activity over the last couple of days in Tuapse at an oil refinery there. So the Ukrainians are certainly very active at the moment, aerially speaking. Whether they are having much success, I don't know. It depends who you listen to. The Russian Ministry of Defense have said that they have prevented a massive attack by Ukrainian drones on Crimea. 6 UAVs were shot down and 4 more were disabled with the help of electronic warfare, so they said. And that was, in fact, again, Yevtoria and Saki. So Saki, there's an airbase at Saki. Whether any of those succeeded, I guess we won't know just yet, at least. Now, a couple of days ago on this same topic, I was telling you about how there were some drones, 3 drones that went into Belgorod. Belgorod is a city in the Belgorod Oblast, just over the border into Russia from Ukraine. Now, we know that Ukraine can send drones really quite successfully to air bases quite a long way out, to Crimea, to Tuapse, so on and so forth. And then there were these 3 drones that failed to do anything. Their explosives didn't go off. And Tim White here is saying, remember those drones that crashed in Belgorod? I'm now calling this out as provocation, i.e. Russia firing on its own side to try to engender hatred of Ukraine and justify retaliatory action. I've come to the conclusion after the news this morning that each UAV had makeshift IEDs attached but mysteriously didn't explode. Ukraine has already shown it's capable of successfully attacking very long-range military targets successfully. Now we're supposed to believe they couldn't fly a few kilometers and couldn't detonate explosives. I don't know whether this is successful electronic warfare that just brings these out of the sky and the explosives didn't go off, or whether there's this genuine kind of false flag operation from the Russians. I don't know, but this is Tim White theorizing that it could well be a false flag operation. Little by little, Russians are beginning to flee Crimea to Russia, says the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov. It seems that the invaders on the peninsula have turned out to be smarter than their colleagues in the Zaporizhia direction. They realize that it is better to escape first than our armed forces will still get to them, said Ivan Fedorov. Bit of issue with translation there. This is something, actually, there was another source talking about how military families are moving out of Crimea, as in some of the military are moving their families back to Russia. This is an interesting development if it's true, because it shows the psyche of the people living in Crimea, shows the psyche of the Russian military as to how confident they might be feeling, and also how much they may feel that Crimea will be one of the targets for the Ukrainians. So that certainly reflects something there. Okay, going on to a tiny bit of geopolitics. Jens Stoltenberg, who's NATO prime mover, Stoltenberg invites Zelenskyy to attend the NATO summit in Vilnius. So this is the idea that even if Ukraine don't get to be members of NATO anytime soon, they are members in all but name. Now, this might not invoke Article 5. Obviously, they're already been invaded, so Article 5 is kind of not quite couldn't be applicable. You know, they can't join in the middle of a war, and this is one of the rules. You can't join if you've got territorial disputes on your borders, because obviously you'd join NATO and then straight away NATO would be involved in the invocation of Article 5. So that can't happen. But the fact that he's been invited by Stoltenberg and that NATO is cozying up to Ukraine and Ukraine is cozying up to NATO, it means that relationship is already there, that they are perhaps members in all but name. I don't know. I think it's an interesting scenario, as this guy says, one step closer. Right, this is particularly worrying. anti-government protester in Moldova. So there's been lots of footage recently of these anti-government protests in Moldova, where you've got lots of people sort of trampling on the cardboard cutout faces or face of the, I think, the president of Moldova or prime minister, I'm not sure, and lots of anti-government activity. And the theory from Moldovan intelligence and Ukrainian intelligence is that this is Russian provocation, and that indeed these are just adjutants being sent over from Russia to Moldova to give this impression that everyone in Moldova is unhappy, that actually there's a lot of pro-Russian sentiment, when in reality it looks rather like 2014, little green men, or in this case, little bespectacled men doing the work of the Russians. Well, how do we know this? Well, here's at least one case of a protester being in Moldova who can't speak Moldovan and has come from Russia, being interviewed. How controversial is that? What are you doing in Moldova? Like, what is going on here? Oh, Russia are just doing what Russia do, and it is really quite frustrating. I don't know if this has been translated here into English. Actually, I hadn't seen this. Okay, yes, it has. So let's turn off the volume. So that's brilliant. So he says, right, what is said here? Get in the car, pilot. He says, I can't understand your language. Sorry. This is yours. The ER is yours. Well, the Moldovan one. This is Moldova. How old are you? 21. And did you learn Romanian in school? No, I didn't say from here. Where did you get it? I'm from Russia. The translation's a bit funky there, but that's just saying the conversation actually goes on there. So basically, he's like not learned Romanian, Moldovan. He's from Russia, and it's all very controversial. Polish government official has said that Russia was behind a hacking attack that blocked users' access to the online tax filing system. There will be constant cyber warfare going on behind the scenes all over the world, arguably, but in particular hotspots. So Poland is one of the biggest defenders of Ukraine, and biggest supporters of Ukraine in terms of military aid. And so Poland will be one of the main targets for cyber warfare activities, no doubt. And here is another example. Reuters has reported that Russia's oil revenues for January have fallen by 40%, $18.5 billion against $30 billion in January 2022. So that's a year-on-year fall of 40%. No report says, I expect this downfall to continue from February and onwards, since newly imposed sanctions will come into effect. So it's not going to be just about oil revenue, but there will be other kind of products, other refined products that are based on oil, kerosene, and lots of other things that are being hit by a second price capping from the EU and Ukrainian allies, and that will eat into Russian revenues even further. Okay, so off geopolitics onto a couple of random bits. So Russia is again accused of deliberately firing at emergency workers. This is something they've done in previous wars, and it's something they've done in this war repeatedly. One rescuer was killed in Sviatohirsk, and 4 others were injured after another double-tap shelling. Regional head Pavlo Kirilenko said this is a conscious and cynical attack on those who help civilians. Again, war crimes are invoked here when you're A, targeting residential areas, and then B, targeting those areas when they're being cleared up by emergency services. It seems that on both counts you are being morally problematic. Partisan movement is getting more visible. Henichevsk, Skadovsk, Novokakhovka, all is Ukraine. These are areas of the Kherson Oblast that are on the left bank, which is the eastern bank of the Dnieper as it comes down. There is a lot of partisan activity, or increasing partisan activity, and you might say, oh, it's only spray painting or putting ribbons up and stuff. This is important. This says to the occupiers that no, we don't want you here, and it gives people who are not pro-Russian a sense of identity and a sense of purpose and a sense of collective confidence against those oppressors. So partisan movement over the last week has seen more than 100 graffiti pieces appearing, mainly on the central avenues of the cities, and more than 400 ribbons were tied, and almost 500 leaflets were distributed. So, little but a lot, and it is saying something, and that's really great. Okay, now on to the last section, which is military aid and other types of aid, of course. Let me just clear up my tabs here with my left hand. Okay, so next 3 months will be quite active, says Flash News reports. They will determine the further course of events. Kirilo Budanov said, the sooner the Russians leave Ukraine, the more theoretically they will have a chance to keep their territory within more or less similar borders, he emphasized. So this is the idea. Ukraine needs attack aircraft. First of all, A-10 Thunderbolt 2 aircraft. The head of the NDI of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Major General Kirilo Budanov, said in an interview on the Voice of America. Now, this is interesting because A-10s they're asking for them, but there's a lot of people saying, although these will be great for sort of bombing runs and what have you, that they will actually be easy targets in the sky. There's no point having A-10s until you've got air superiority. So until you've done seed operations to take out all the enemy air defenses, these would just be easy pickings. So they can ask for these things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are the most sensible things for Ukraine to have. For a whole number of reasons, it really is imperative that if the air is being considered a tool, that the really quite capable air defenses of the Russians need to be taken out. So there are a lot of surface-to-air missile systems, and some of their better systems have some pretty considerable range. They need to be taken out. There's been talk. I saw the other day a list of equipment that the US defense is buying in for this year, or not this year, that it comes in on a monthly basis, and someone's picking through the details on one of the US government websites and looking at the stuff that they've ordered in. Now, this doesn't mean that this is stuff going to Ukraine, but it could be going to Ukraine, or it could be replacing the stuff that the US are giving to Ukraine. But there's a number of harm style missiles, which are anti-radiation missiles, with really quite considerable range, that were being bought in by the US. Whether they'll end up in Ukraine, I don't know, but that would be interesting. It'd be great to see them being able to shoot off some of these missiles and take out SAM systems or radar systems that were really quite far behind enemy lines. I don't know how easy those HARM missiles are to take out themselves by surface-to-air missile defense systems. I find Rheinmetall. Rheinmetall is a German defense company, but it seems to be right in the middle of everything at the moment. It must be like bonus city for the execs at Rheinmetall, because they're in the middle of the whole kind of leopard thing, free the leopards. But they're not like the bad guys, as in they're not saying no. They're actually saying we're the guys that make these. We're happy to like make more leopards and do up some leopard ones. We're happy to build these Gepard rounds if Switzerland won't allow someone else to export them. They're picking up all of this work, and they've got a load of stuff in storage that they're happy to sell on or give on or whatever. It's up to the German government to give the go-ahead for half of these things. But Rheinmetall are definitely coming out of this whole war. My guess is fairly well. So this is Thomas Tyner, who's a former artilleryman, I believe. I just listened to the podcast. Rheinmetall's CEO clearly states that the company sent its 2 prototype Sky Ranger and Skynex systems to Ukraine. Those are the wildly superior successors of Gepard. Never seen that mentioned before. Also not seen it in Oryx's list. And this is fascinating because a company like Rheinmetall must be quite happy. I don't know, it's probably the wrong word here, but it's okay having a war fairly close that they are quite heavily involved in, because that is the greatest test ground that they can possibly imagine. Which is right. We've got a couple of prototypes of vehicles here. We're not sure how good they are and what their capability is. At least we've tested them in theory, but it would be really great if we can get some real world testing of these. Do you want these, or do you want to buy these, or I don't know how it works, but sending these prototypes into Ukraine onto the front lines will get them some very useful data and allow them to go through the process of improving and adapting and making sure that they eventually get out a piece of kit that's really decent. So the CEO of Rheinmetall here, Armin Paperga, disclosed in an interview that Ukraine receives Skynex and Skyranger. So I guess the air defense system was supposed to protect Berlin. I guess the job for me now is finding out what these are and how good they are. I mean, they look pretty futuristic as far as a gun's concerned, but that appears to be, the descendant of the Gepard, I guess. And staying on Rheinmetall, so Rheinmetall is cooperating with Defense Security Intel to provide, so that's Estonian, that's the Estonian flag, to provide to Ukraine Surveil Spire, which consists of mobile surveillance towers with day and night capable camera equipment, autopiloted mini drones, and a control system. Delivery has already commenced, as according to Reuters. So again, here we have stuff that's brand new that Rheinmetall are creating that's already being used in Ukraine. And this is stuff that we're finding out about. You can imagine there's probably an awful lot of kit in Ukraine that we don't know is there and the Ukrainians are putting to good use. So this is Surveil Spire. Just to go back to the beginning there, I presume these are just dry them up, set them up, and they give you surveillance of an area, rather like radar does for drones and whatnot. This possibly could be more visual surveillance for a certain area, automatic, some kind of automaticity there, rather than someone just looking at pictures. But yeah, and possibly even drones being part of that surveillance network. So fascinating. I don't know, I'm sort of joining the dots there, probably joined them incorrectly, but you get the idea. That Rheinmetall are really involved in this war. Lockheed Martin is upgrading its factory and increasing production of M142 HIMARS from 48 to 96 launches per year due to high demand. So this is what I was saying recently, is that when the US give a bunch of munitions or a bunch of equipment to Ukraine for this war, it's not just a case of being totally charitable. There are these other benefits. Now, again, this is very weird for me. I'm not like defending the sorry, that's still on the sound of that. I'm not defending the industrial military complex here, but there is the benefit to the US is that people will see the stuff that they are giving to Ukraine and see how well it's doing. HIMARS has come out as an absolute winner here, so that now loads of people are ordering HIMARS. I mean, Poland's ordered an absolute bunch of HIMARS stuff, so on and so forth. Loads of people are ordering HIMARS, and Lockheed Martin are going, thank you very much. So the US government has actually done a huge amount of marketing for us. Now, I don't know whether there's a kickback to the US government. I don't know whether I mean, they'll certainly get, you would assume, extra tax revenue. The better Lockheed Martin do, the better the US government does. And so it's not just a case of sending a bunch of dollar notes to Ukraine. They are giving this equipment that does cost money, but there is a benefit to the US. And the industrial military complex is one of the major beneficiaries. And then, as a knock-on, tax revenue, you would assume, will go up for the US government. And there's an example of that. Estonia, going back to Estonia, has donated 44.5% of its military budget to Ukraine. So here's an infographic. Now, I quite often mention this, which is, yes, in real terms, the US has given the most stuff to Ukraine, but it's also the richest country in the world that has the most stuff. And its military budget is insanely big, just ridiculously big. When you look at other countries like Estonia, like Latvia, like Lithuania, like Poland, and when you see what they have given as a percentage of their military budget or a percentage of their GDP, gross domestic product, their kind of the amount of stuff they make a year, the amount of basically how big their economy is on an annual basis. As a percentage of those figures, these countries have given more than the United States. In other words, it's you know someone who's homeless giving you £5 out of their £10 is giving you 50%. Now they've only given you £5, but then a millionaire giving you like £1,000 is actually in real terms giving you more, but they've got shed loads more money they can give, and that homeless person's giving you half of their what they own. And so, actually, who's more generous? Well, in real terms, the millionaire, but in other ways, actually, the homeless person is being more generous in terms of their capability or their capacity, sorry, to give. Anyway, I've explained it 100 times, but here we see Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania doing particularly generous work when it comes to giving to Ukraine. And in fact, it goes down here. So Estonia 44.5, and again, this is a percentage of their military budget. So it depends how big the military budget is, and where the US has a phenomenally big military budget. Obviously, their percentage has been much smaller. So I don't know whether GDP is a better guide here. There's a more consistent guide than a percentage of military budget. But nonetheless, let's have a look at this. 44.5% for Estonia, Latvia just behind, then Lithuania, Bulgaria, 22%, Poland, Luxembourg, wow. But then Luxembourg might have an absolutely tiny military budget. I suggest you go and look at Perun's latest video about small countries and how they set up their defense. How to do defense for a small country. Very interesting, and you might get an idea of like, well, their needs are going to be very different, Luxembourg compared to the US. Czech Republic 15%, Denmark almost 12%, Slovakia just behind them, and Slovenia then the UK. And indeed, when you're talking about the US, US 6%, so 6% of their military budget, but then their military budget is massive. So I would like to see this as a percentage of GDP, actually, because I think that would be a slightly better indicator. And that's not decrying the US. It's just things are grey. It's not so simple as to say the US are the most generous, and it's not so simple to say Estonia the most generous, because actually both of those are to some degree incorrect. CNN, US allies have trained over 4,000 Ukrainian soldiers. I don't know, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. That's incorrect as far as I'm concerned, because I thought the UK last year alone had trained 10,000. So the US has already trained more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers since January, and over 4,000 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So the US, that's the US, but actually the allies, so this is a misleading sort of headline. The US has trained over 4,000. Allies have trained far more than that. So the UK has been involved. That's one of the big things that we started off with originally. Indeed, here, that training will be in addition to the recruit training program already running in the UK, which has seen 10,000 troops brought to battle readiness in the last 6 months, and which will upskill a further 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers this year. The UK will continue to work with the Ukrainian Armed Forces and international community to scale the program up in 2023. So, as you can see there, that is this person has kind of disagreed with the Kiev Independent. I think it's just the grammar of that is incorrect. But there you go. So that is a really important component of the aid that is being given to the Ukraine. It's not just about throwing them a bunch of stuff. It's about training up their soldiers, about training up the people on equipment. But the general basic training for soldiers is really important, because you want to give every element of what the Ukraine is doing on the front line and behind. There should be a competitive advantage. So if we're going to give you kit, we want to give you kit that's better than the Russian kit. If we're going to give you training, it wants to be better training than the Russian training. If everything's better, then they have this competitive advantage going right through everything they do, and that should transfer to success on the battlefield, to a ratio that's of casualties that's in favor of the Ukrainians, and that then translates into territorial advantage as well, territorial gain. And finally, Serbia, which is an interesting country because it is seen as quite pro-Russian in many regards, has handed over 3,500 missiles to Ukraine for the Grad multiple launch rocket system, says the defense minister Milos Vucevic. I probably butchered that. Ammunition was transitioned through Turkey and Slovakia. So this might be, well, mind you, this is the defense minister has said this, but I don't know why they've transferred it through Turkey. Slovakia is a lot closer. I don't know. Anyway, there you go. Good stuff, Serbia. Keep that going, obviously. And that's the end of the news section for today. Just to let you know, I said I went to the neurologist today. All good. I'm stable. So I have primary progressive multiple sclerosis. But here's something, and this is connected to Russia. Back in 2018, when I was diagnosed with PPMS, there was not a lot of treatment in fact, there was no treatment on the NHS for that type of multiple sclerosis. It's progressive. I just get worse until I die. So I did a bunch of research, found out about stem cell therapy, and the best place for stem cell therapy for MS was in Moscow. And I raised £40,000 because it is now on the NHS in Southampton, which is very close to me. I don't know whether I'd qualify for it. And a couple of places in the UK, I don't know whether I'd qualify. But here, in 2019, almost straight away after, as soon as I could, I raised a bunch of money, very kind people around the world, and went and had stem cell therapy in Russia, in Moscow, at a fantastic clinic with an amazing team of people. And it's such a shame now that I'm sure many people won't be able to access that service due to the war going on. Do I have Russia to thank for? Well, not Russia, but I have that clinic and the Dr. Fedorenko is amazing. Russia. I had my treatment in Russia, and that's very interesting because obviously now I find the country and the leadership in Russia entirely problematic. Is there attention? No. As you know, the hospital provided a service. It happened to be in that country. Fantastic. Was that provided because it was Russian? Not necessarily. There is a pretty good clinic in Mexico I could have gone to, but it was just that the Russian one was an inpatient clinic. So where I had no immune system left due to hardcore chemotherapy, I had to spend sort of 20-something days in isolation. And in the Mexican clinic, you have to go and have that outside. Whereas in the clinic in Russia, it's just in there where you've already had everything else. You just stay in this room, and that was just beneficial. So, and there are other clinics around the world that offer the same stuff. So I had it done in Russia. I don't know if that has any effect over how I evaluate Russia and the Ukraine and the geopolitical situation. But it is interesting. I do have a connection to Russia. And anyway, that stem cell therapy, which if it works, it keeps you stable. I've now been stable for 4 years. We'll be coming up for 4 years in a month's time. And that is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, my walking's a bit rubbish. But then is that because I spend my life on my ass doing stuff like this rather than doing exercise? I need to do more exercise, etc., etc. Anyway, that's a little bit of personal stuff for me and just what I've been doing. So today's video is late because I had to go and see a neurologist, but it's all good. I did fall over the other day because I'm a bit of a muppet and my legs sometimes don't work, so I need to do more exercise. But anyway, there's my connection to Russia. I hope that was of some kind of vague interest, and if not, tough luck. Thank you. You're all legends. Speak to you later, hopefully.